Welcome to Temple Talk from Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven. Today is the 24th day of the month of Tevet, 5780, January 21st, 2020, and this Shabbat, Parashat Vaera. And I appeared, second Torah portion in the book of Shemot, Exodus. And the Shabbat is also the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon coming up, the month of Shavat, the month of renewal. And the new moon of Shvat, Rosh Chodesh, will be Sunday night, the 26th of January, and Monday, January 27th. It's really cold and rainy here in Jerusalem. The gates of heaven are opening on our beloved land. We have a record amount of rains falling within a record amount of days. The Kinneret, our water source, is rising steadily, and it's quite cold, and water everywhere, which is considered to be such a tremendous blessing. I don't know what we're doing right, but must be doing something right. And there's nothing negative to say about the rain except keep it coming. We really need it.
Filling up the rivers, filling up the lakes. The lake. I heard that the northern part of the Dead Sea and the southern part, which have been separated now for some years because the level has been lowering, I believe it's connected.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful, and our appreciation and acknowledgement of Hashem's hand in our lives is really emphasized by our attitude about the rainfall. It is everywhere in Torah. Water is equated with divine blessing, and it's the key, it's the secret to Shefa, to the influx of blessing, parnasah, sustenance, livelihood, everything. When it rains, it pours, and so it's a sign of blessing. May it continue for everyone. Amen.
Amen.
You know, Yitzchak, right now, today, tomorrow, these couple of days, this week, there's anticipated to be a huge disruption in the traffic flow, and in security arrangements are heavy in Jerusalem as 47 dignitaries from around the world are converging upon Jerusalem to participate in ceremonies that mark the 75th liberation of the Auschwitz
75th anniversary.
75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp in World War II, in the Shoah. And it's quite an undertaking, of course, for the security forces to provide this operation, to secure this operation, and all these presidents and kings and dignitaries are converging upon the city. It's pretty amazing, and I'm kind of plugging it in my mind to our Torah portion and to the backstory of the time that we're in, which of course is not without significance, but on the contrary is resonating and reverberating with meaning, because of the fact that the Torah is the story of our lives, and this is how we live. So, you know, first of all, again, everything is given more significance by our leaders today, and by everyone who is involved in the public sphere. You know, the whole context of the Shoah is being examined, as it were, through the prism of current resurgence of anti-Semitism. You know, the news stories coming out of every country, and lately, surprisingly to many people, out of the United States, of rise in anti-Semitic attacks and hate crimes directed at Jews, and all the things that are going on, have been going on for some time in Europe. Questions about various countries' responsibility, various countries in Europe that seem to be kind of attempting to rewrite their history, to exonerate them from any personal involvement. You know what I'm talking about. And then, you know, you have the BDS movement, you have virulent anti-Israel / anti-Jew activity, because it's now out in the open to be the same thing. You have legislation in different countries outlawing things like circumcision and shechita, Jewish preparation of meat. And then you also have various European countries vying for kind of like they're lauding themselves that they're actually very safe for Jews, that they're a haven for Jews. They're saying that they accept responsibility. So all this is going on, and I'm looking at Parashat Shemot, last week's Torah portion, and this week's Torah portion, and thinking about the fact that honestly, what was really going on in Egypt, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week. What was really going on in Egypt was the first attempt at state-sponsored genocide, and it was directed against the Jews. So it's quite eerily fitting, chilling, I don't know what the word is I'm trying to use, to think about all of this, how really, the seeds of this, how should I call it, I don't know, the seeds of this idea of systematically trying to destroy the Jews was really in Pharaonic Egypt.
As well as what might seem to be a very irrational dichotomy, which again I think is reflected in today's world politics as well. You just made mention of it. Pharaoh was terrified of the Jews, the Hebrews, because their numbers. He thought they were a fifth column. They could join up with an invading army and just destroy Egypt. So you would think, rationally, as soon as Moshe came to him and said, "Let us go," go and don't come back. But no, his reaction was the exact opposite. You're not going anywhere. And even, he would vacillate, "I'll let you go, but not your children, not your livestock," meaning you have to come back. So you mentioned it before, there's this growing violent anti-Semitism throughout the world, and then there are countries who don't want the Jews to leave. On the one hand, they're not making serious attempts to curb the anti-Semitism, and on the other hand, they don't want the Jews. So what do they want?
Right.
What's going on here?
Right, make up your mind. And again, that whole business of they'll join up with their enemy when they attack, and they'll rise up. That bespeaks and foreshadows this whole specter of dual loyalism, which is the greatest nightmarish fear of the Jews in any country, that they'll be accused of dual loyalism. But we know from Pharaoh's comments, from his own statements, he was just using that as an excuse, because again, as we pointed out last week, he was the first person in history to refer to them as a nation, and really what he objected to was just their existence as a nation. And when we study the sources of our teachings, the sages' insights into what was going on, and let me uninterrupt myself. Last week we also spoke about in our video, we spoke about the stages that are outlined in the initial verses of last week's Torah portion, about how he sought to deal with the situation as it became more and more complex. But when we learn about the depth of the operation of what was then his final solution against the Jewish people, it was really horrific, and it's not something that's emphasized so much. It's between the lines. The Midrash talks about the incredible death machine, really, that Pharaoh launched to destroy the Jewish people. The murder of the babies, and the wholesale slaughter of children, and it was really, really the first example that we have in Torah testifying historically to state-sponsored genocide. And now, of course, in Parashat Vaera, everything is coming to a head. We have 7 of the 10 plagues are taking place in this week's Torah portion, which begins with this whole very, very unusual dialogue between God and Moshe regarding Hashem's identity, regarding how he makes himself known. And there's a whole new thing that's being introduced here, which we talk more about in this week's Parsha, about how Hashem was known only as El Shaddai to the forefathers, but his name, Hashem, which of course refers to the name of 4 letters, which we refer to reverentially as literally as Hashem, which means the name, which is the name that we don't pronounce other than in prayer. He says, I didn't make that known to them. And many of the commentaries talk about that one aspect of this idea of him not having made himself known that way is that, well, that name is like the name of fulfilling promises, right? It's the name. First of all, it's the name of an identity that is basically supernature. It's above nature, which of course is everything that's taking place here in this Torah portion. Is the ultimate, the ultimate example of how Hashem is the substance of reality, really, and because he breaks all his own rules as far as the boundaries of nature, etc. But he promised these promises to the forefathers. That he promised to Abraham at the covenant between the portions that his children are going to be in servitude, and that eventually they're going to leave. He promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that their children would inherit this land, but he didn't fulfill it yet. So one of the aspects of this identity switch that Hashem is making to Moshe is that the time has come now for all of these promises to be fulfilled. Of course, the subject of Hashem's names and the various identities through which he manifests himself is a complicated subject.
Well, even in last week's Parsha, when Moshe said to God, "Who shall I tell him sent me?" and God said, "Tell him that I shall be what I shall be sent you." Now, is that how it's translated in your translation?
In this one, yes. In the art scroll, it is, but it's consistently.
It's "I am who I am."
Yes,
which is not at all what that name implies. That name implies that not that God changes, but that our perception and our understanding and our connection, historical connection, changes. So meaning it's dynamic, meaning that he's saying to Moshe, you haven't seen nothing yet.
Right. Our understanding, our conception of godliness is constantly evolving and constantly growing according to our spiritual aspirations. But this is just an interesting thing that is just a very noteworthy idea that consistently in every single non-Jewish Bible, and I'm saying this based on I'm not conjecting. I'm telling you as a fact. In every single non-Jewish Bible, you will always find Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, translated as "I am that I am."
Right.
It's the famous voice from the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston. "I am that I am," right? And that is like the most blatant, really ridiculous, purposeful mistranslation that was part of a conspiracy of mistranslations that was initiated by non-Jews that sought to convey their own particular agenda in various deliberately mistranslated words and phrases in the Hebrew Bible. And this is a very, very classic example, because "I am that I am" basically was coined to intimate a certain non-Jewish theological idea about God and his components or makeup from the very beginning, and it goes along with other ideas in this foreign theology, and so that's why we translated "I am that I am." And it's so funny because it's the wrong tense. I mean, any person with rudimentary Hebrew knows that this is in future tense, and it's all about a continuously evolving and refining revelation,
Mm-hmm.
which includes so many ideas. So yeah, as we always say, you got to study Hebrew. You got to study the Torah in Hebrew, and this is just another kind of a reflection of a topic that we mentioned a number of weeks ago, which is why the translation of the Torah into Greek was considered to be such a tragedy by the sages, even though ideally it should be considered to be a wonderful thing to provide access to Torah knowledge for the whole world, and that's definitely our goal. It's my goal. But if it's done with a purposeful agenda of miscalculation for some other purpose, then it's a total loss, and a person walks away thinking that they have it right here in their hands. They have the Torah, they have the understanding, they have the knowledge, and it's actually far from the truth.
Now, in this week, you mentioned at the opening of this week's Parashat, Vaera, I appeared to the forefathers Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai, which refine my answer. I mean, what I'm about to say here, if I'm not right on the money, Rabbi, but I think that name of God implies how the revelation of God through the natural world, through, as opposed to what's about to happen, which is God's going to break all the rules. El Shaddai is God created a world, and God is present in that world, but according to the boundaries that God set in that world.
That's definitely one level of meaning of the name Shaddai, Shin Daled Yud, which is a holy name of Hashem. It's definitely one of the holy names. I'm pronouncing it now only for the purpose of teaching. And our sages tell us in the Midrash that homiletically that one idea conveyed by the name is Baruch She'amar Dai Le'olamo, which means blessed is he who said enough. The word Dai, Daled Yud, in Hebrew means enough. Blessed is he who said enough to his world. And the teaching that's being conveyed there is this idea that, yes, exactly as you said, that Hashem basically set boundaries to everything. There's a boundary where the sea meets the sand. There's a boundary to everything, and otherwise the universe would have expanded forever. But he had to make it fit for human habitation. He had to make it a place where people would be able to live and exercise free will and find him in the midst of all the chaos, which is, of course, the whole basis of the human experience, to find Hashem and to choose. And so he had to make a world for us to live in. And in order for Hashem, who is without limit, to make a world, he had to constrict the light and make it within confines, and that's kind of one of the secrets that's alluded to by that name. Whereas, as you said, in the context of what's going on now, from this point on, every rule is being broken. There's no more boundaries. There's no more nature anymore. As water turns to blood, and as light turns to darkness, and all the other things that happen here break all the rules. The expression of our sages, which is so beautiful in the classic literature, where they talk about the plagues, is they call it Shidud Hamarachot, which basically means that Hashem, to use a colloquial, understood English, is like he broke the bank.
Right, or what do you say it in gambling, in a casino? You did the house. What is it? The expression you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I also can't place it, because shidud really means kind of like to rob.
Yeah, piracy.
Yeah, piracy, exactly. So he was shoded the marachot. Means that he brought the house down. Is that what you're thinking?
No.
He broke the bank.
Broke the bank.
He broke the bank. Yeah. In so doing, he proved exactly what he was addressing himself not only to Pharaoh, but on the level of these plagues addressing themselves to Pharaoh. Don't forget, Pharaoh said his initial reaction to Moshe was like, "Who's God? Who's God? I never heard of him." And then he said, "And who is he that I should listen to him?" So one level of that conversation was conveying the idea that Pharaoh did not believe that Hashem created the world. And furthermore, he did not believe that anyone is in control of him. In fact, he, as you know, made himself into God. This is a very famous idea that our sages teach. This is the reason why Hashem said to Moshe that you should meet him by the river in the morning. Great king Pharaoh was probably the most important and powerful king in the world at the time. Why was he taking his morning stroll by the river unattended by anyone early in the morning? Hashem said, you can find him there. So that's where I want you to confront him. And of course, our sages teach us that Moshe caught him, again, pardon me, but literally with his pants down, because Pharaoh made himself into a god. And that's the PR marketing scheme that his handlers had, I guess, or maybe he came up with himself. And I guess his people were extremely naive. Of course, there was no like Snapchat or like FaceTime or any type of live video then. And there were no security cameras. And he held it in all day and went down to the water early in the morning before anybody got up and took care of his basic needs. But since he wasn't going all day in front of everybody thought, wow, he's God. I guess that's all it takes, really, is just hold it in. Pardon me, I don't mean to be crass, but this is exactly what our sages tell us about who Pharaoh was. Ezekiel the prophet, in one verse, describes him, and Hashem tells Ezekiel, speak to the great serpent that crouches in the river Nile, who says, I am the Nile and I created it. And that's also an aspect of Pharaoh's incredible megalomaniac despotic rule, is that he claimed to be the god of the Nile, and he created the Nile. So one aspect of these plagues was Hashem basically confronting Pharaoh with who he really was. But another aspect of the plagues was for the people of Israel, for them to see. Don't forget that when Moshe first approached the people of Israel, they believed and they bowed down. They were over the moon. Mm-hmm. But the second time, they already didn't listen to him because of their shortness of breath from the difficult work. So this is also designed for them. And of course, the plagues ultimately were the final line in the sand that divided between Israel and Egypt. And there's so much going on in this week's Torah portion. It is really, really overwhelming. And there's the music.
Absolutely.
We just started. I can't believe it. Stay with us. Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven with Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 24th day of the month of Tevet, 5780. It's January 20th, 2020. And this coming Shabbat is Parashat Vaera. And I appeared, as we were talking about before, it's the first word of the verse, and I appeared to your forefathers as such, but now I'm going to appear to you as such. And this coming Sunday evening, Monday, is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the new month of Shvat, the 11th of the 12 months of the Hebrew year. And
Counting from Nisan,
the first of our months. And yeah, God is
breaking the bank.
Breaking the bank and stepping out. You know, he's presenting himself to the world, as it were. You know, he's been the God of our forefathers and has protected and kept them and guarded them and seen them through good times and bad. And now God is going to make his presence in this world felt for Egypt and for all the nations, because you mentioned before, there was no internet, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, but yet the plagues, the 10 plagues, was something that was registered around the world. All of humanity was aware that something was going on here. It was not simply exclusive to Egypt.
And this whole idea of the magnitude of the plagues also, it's like Pharaoh represents the whole school of thought that the world always existed, olam kadmon, that it was that there is no intelligent design, that the world always existed. And I spoke about it recently in terms of Aristotelian philosophy, that the world always existed, and that's why he said, like, who was Hashem? I never heard of Hashem, of any such thing. And that's, of course, so relevant to our world today, those that maintain that there is no judge, there is no jury, there is no purpose, because everything is just what it is, that the world was not created for a higher purpose by a higher purpose. And interestingly, the whole experience of the Exodus from Egypt, with everything that includes, and the bondage and the terrible suffering in Egypt, and the refinement of the people of Israel there, and the experiencing of the plagues, and culminating with the Makat Bechorot, the killing of the firstborn, and then the incredible experience of the splitting of the sea. First of all, it's all about leading us to Mount Sinai. It's all about leading the people of Israel to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that is all about leading the people of Israel into the land of Israel to build the Holy Temple. And it's all of that, really, in a way, that Pharaoh was trying to prevent. And again, as we spoke about, that whole issue, are we a people, are we a religion? Is it fair to say that we're a people, or are you more comfortable calling us religion? It's Hashem himself refers to the people of Israel in this Torah portion so many times as my people, my Am.
Let my people go. Let my people worship me.
And the interesting thing about Shlachat Ami, let my people go. But the interesting thing about the confluence, in a way, of the identity as a nation and the identity as a religion, in a way, even though I try never to use the word religion, because it's totally inadequate expression for something that a Torah existence is so far beyond a word that just seems to convey the idea of ritual and that kind of thing. The Torah experience is about being plugged into the universe completely, to the sum total of the reality of the Creator in every moment of our lives. But I digress. But the whole idea of all of this, it's so fundamental to our understanding of Hashem, to our relationship with Hashem. The whole idea of this experience of leaving Egypt and everything that it entails is so pivotal that we mention it. First of all, it's a positive commandment to remember it every single day, to remember the going out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. It's included in the Shema, and also we actually mentioned it on Friday night at the most important moment of the week, when we sanctify the Sabbath.
Right.
We actually call the Sabbath a memorial to the going out of Egypt, which is so unusual, because the Sabbath, of course, came before the going out of Egypt, but there was nobody around. There was nobody around to testify to it. And so I'm getting back to exactly what you were talking about, that it was for the whole world. The Exodus from Egypt demonstrated, with all of its paraphernalia, like the plagues, demonstrates to the whole world who Hashem really is. And again, Pharaoh represents a voice that has taken over the world today, which is, who is Hashem? Why should I listen to him?
Those two questions, who is Hashem, refers to the understanding that you mentioned, that who is Hashem, his understanding was there was no creator to the world, it just existed. And why should I listen to Hashem is that God does not relate to his creation. God didn't create the world according to Pharaoh, and not only that, but this God that Moshe is talking about, has no relationship to humankind. And these two beliefs, that God created the world and that God definitely intervenes in history on man's behalf, are pillars of the Torah Truth. Civilization.
Right.
Yes, and the Ten Commandments begins with, I am your God that took you out of Egypt.
That, by the way,
we have a
that-
relationship because I'm here.
People ask, what is that a commandment? In other words, a commandment, do this, don't do that. What is that first commandment, I am Hashem? That is basically the commandment of belief.
Mm-hmm.
But I started to say, this whole idea about the confluence of the religious identity and the national identity and Hashem himself calling us so many times an Am, a nation. The thing is, the nationhood was contingent upon and ratified by the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole idea. That's our
Birth certificate.
It's our constitution, and it's also our marriage license, as it were, marriage certificate to Hashem. But it's a culmination. It's a consummation. It's all that is the very essence of our nationhood, and that's why, for Bernie Sanders to say, "I'm proud to be Jewish, but I don't identify, with anything," right? That's really, maybe it suits him and it's convenient, and it, of course, maybe it explains his incredibly anti-Semitic policies, which somebody could say, oh, you can never say that a Jew is anti-Semitic. Actually, some Jews are the biggest anti-Semites. But anyway, it's impossible for a Jew to say, I'm proud to be Jewish, but it has no manifestation in anything in my life, because the entire identity of the people of Israel is dependent upon their relationship with the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And Hashem says that in a very compassionate way, and that's also the secret and the source of our incredible angst in this world, our disenfranchisement, our feelings sometimes of existential isolation as Jews, and our frustration in putting all of our efforts, be they in various areas of endeavor that we might be blessed with intellectually, however, putting them in all sorts of different places, trying to find happiness, trying to find fulfillment, trying to find some sort of connection, it's not really going to work. It's not going to alleviate the existential angst of the Jew, because we belong with Hashem, reflecting Hashem in this world. That's the whole reason why He took us out of Egypt in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That verse that we say every day in the Kriyat Shema, I am Hashem your God, who took you out of Egypt to be for you a God.
Mm-hmm.
That's why He took us out.
Yeah. For the relationship.
Yeah.
Not just to mark up as an accomplishment, but for the living relationship. Again, that reflects also on the name, I shall be what I shall be. It's the relationship is steadfast, but always changing and always developing and always reflecting new light and new insights. You mentioned before, Rabbi, that the Exodus from Egypt was for the purpose of receiving Torah at Sinai, which was for the purpose of inheriting the land and building the Holy Temple. So here we are today, thousands of years later, in the land, and we still haven't built a Holy Temple, but...
Well, it's interrupted. We had built it, actually.
We had built it, yes, that's for sure. But I just wanted to add to that...
This is just a little hiccup.
Right. But in terms of current events, we reported earlier in the week that the numbers of Jews going up to the Temple Mount over each year, over the past 10 years, going up as Jews, going up to be seen in that place as a Jew, going up visibly outward as a Jew, has increased. I think it's sixfold or something. In 2009, the number was 5,658, and in 2019, 37,708, which is an incredible climb.
Incredible accomplishment, incredible achievement, which we can take some solace in, and in which we can take some feeling of great accomplishment. This is what we've been working towards for many years, and it certainly is an important stage. It's not everything, but it is definitely a preliminary stage for the building of the temple, because this marks a marked turn in an increasing awareness of the Temple Mount's significance to our lives and in temple consciousness, which is what we've been fighting for all this time.
and in the nation's relationship to God. As more and more people, however they describe themselves in the spectrum of religious, not religious, more and more people are going up as Jews in order to be in that spot because they understand it is a holy spot and a special spot and the place that God chose. And that's what makes it important, that's what makes it holy, and that's what makes it a reason to go up there and a reason to guard over it and protect it and maintain and increase Israel's sovereignty over it. And certainly the numbers are going in the right direction, and I have to remind everybody that these numbers are increasing despite the fact that the very limited hours that Jews and the other non-Muslims are even allowed up to the Temple Mount are pittance. I think it's about 4 hours a day, more or less, 5 days a week. So take that number, 37,708, and imagine if Jews had access 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It would skyrocket. Obviously, that is the fear of the Muslims who don't want to see a single Jew up there. In fact, this past Friday, there was a lot of violence, pre-planned, premeditated violence in order to protest. I don't even remember what, but in order to protest, and they were calling for the death of the Jews on the Temple Mount. In fact, you mentioned earlier, Rabbi, this gathering this week, today, in fact, in remembrance of 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. And the Palestinian Authority has published in its media that this is the opportunity to kill Jews in Jerusalem in order to, kind of put a cloud over the whole thing. So, they haven't changed their program yet. They're still into killing Jews. That's for them. The Pharaonic solution is still quite relevant to the Palestinian.
And just to give credit where
leadership.
credit's due, don't forget that Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, has a doctorate in Holocaust denial awarded to him by Moscow University.
Right.
So that is a fact.
What better opportunity for him to prove his credentials here?
And then there's always Iran. Oh, well, there's that.
There's that.
Yitzchak, I know we need to talk about the plagues, and each one is so... It's a world, and they're divided by the classic commentators into different categories, different manifestations, different themes. And each one, there's so much to study about why it happened the way it did, and what it represented, and what Hashem was driving home, which point. And I know you want to talk about that, but if I might just digress for a moment, I want to relate to the fact that, after all, we are in election season. We have been for how many years now? In a sort of Twilight Zone-ish Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
We're facing, what number is this going to be? The third or the
third?
Third. Okay. Anyway, it's an opportune time to reflect upon the concept of leadership qualities, what it means to be a leader for the people of Israel, and of course the place where we really learn that from the most is Moshe, as a benchmark for what a leader is. So I was just thinking about something from last week's Torah portion where all of a sudden Moshe is brought onto the scene. He will be known as the greatest of all the prophets, both those that came before him and those that came after him. He is the Redeemer. He is the one who delivered the people out of slavery. He receives the Torah on Mount Sinai. He has a tremendous distinction over every other prophet in that he saw clearly, not through a vision and not through allegories, like someone who speaks with Hashem face to face, that Hashem calls him in Parashat Bahalotcha in the book of Numbers, trustworthy in all my house. And Moshe is known as the leader who loved every individual as himself, and even, as we found in Parashat Kitisa in chapter 32 and verse 32, where he actually said to Hashem, if you don't forgive the people, just erase my name from your book. So he was willing to sacrifice his life for them, right? And the thing is that as he's introduced onto the scene in last week's Torah portion of Exodus, what do we really know about him? where he came from. That there's a tremendous fast forward where all of a sudden he grows up.
Mm-hmm.
We know he grew up in Pharaoh's house, and he goes out, and he sees what he sees. He sees an Egyptian beating up a Jew,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he kills him.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, the verse that introduces that phrase uses an expression that I don't know if it's repeated very often in the scriptures, and I didn't check, so I'm not sure if it's ever repeated. It might be repeated, but it's not repeated very often, and that is Vayigdal Moshe.
Mm-hmm.
Moshe grew up.
Yeah.
And it means so much more than that he just grew up from being a lad into being a young man. It means that he was imbued with greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Vayigdal Moshe, that he became great, not that he grew up. Don't translate that as he grew up, but that he became great because of his nature, because of who he was, because of his character. And of course, it's strange to us how much the Torah does not record as opposed to how much it does record. There's so much between the lines that the Torah doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us anything really about his childhood, and it skips to the killing of an Egyptian. And actually, there's only 3 incidents that the Torah even shares with us really about the early years of Moshe. And that is, he killed an Egyptian who was striking a Hebrew slave, and then he confronted 2 Hebrew men
Mm-hmm.
who were fighting, and then his intervention with and the saving of Yitro's daughters.
Right.
So what's the common thread in all these 3 incidences that somehow gives us insight into Moshe's nature and his inherent inner qualities of justice, honesty, compassion, which of course are the proper attributes for a prophet, right? For someone that Hashem will deem worthy and of using to manifest his knowledge and his presence in this world. I mean, after all, much more must have happened to Moshe when he was
Mm-hmm.
young, but Torah didn't bother recording it. And these stories were chosen by the Torah not for their chronological order, but because they form the introduction for us to understand everything we need to know about Moshe, and from where emanated his great strength of spirit. And that is that he had a natural inclination. That's what's shown to us by these 3 stories. He had a natural inclination. He had an inability to countenance injustice, and he was overcome with compassion for the suffering of his brothers. And for example, on verse 11 of chapter 2, when the verse states that Moshe saw their suffering, all Rashi says is he directed his eyes and hearts to their suffering,
Mm-hmm.
which of course he doesn't mean like a physical seeing, but rather a deep consideration. And maybe that is a bold statement, because maybe that is a very unusual thing for a person to really identify with someone suffering so much that it consumes them. And maybe this is why Moshe was a leader and no one else, because maybe this isn't just an ordinary thing, and maybe this is the idea of how it crescendoed in
Mm-hmm.
Parashat Kitisa in chapter 32. Well, then erase my name from your book. Who could say that? Who says that? You know what I'm saying? So this is what it really, really means to be a leader for Israel. And all I'm saying is, as we come towards the time of elections, I need to hold out for someone that really, really,
has leadership qualities.
gosh.
There are 2 instances where Moshe noticed something. One was when he had compassion toward the Hebrew slave who was being beaten by the Egyptian. And the other was when he saw the burning bush. And the compassion toward the Hebrew slave reflects the Moshe of Torah, of receiving Torah at Sinai, and of noticing something was odd with the burning bush seems to be the Moshe of Exodus, he saw that something was going on with nature. He perceived that nature had its way, but there was also something supernatural, extraordinary that he, focused on. And that showed to God that he was the man for the job. He was the man to do both those.
And about those 2
deeds.
instances of seeing, there's even an idea that when Hashem saw, and I spoke about what it meant about turning to see the burning bush. Did he turn his head? Did he Did he walk? But there's even an idea that when Hashem said, when it says Vayar Hashem Kisar Leirot, that Hashem saw that he turned to see, that Hashem didn't mean he turned to see the bush. That Hashem was saying to Moshe, "I saw when you turned to see that man being beaten up. That's what I saw. That's what I saw.
I got your attention now,
Right.
and now I have a plan." Yeah, that's very beautiful. So, yeah, Moshe was attuned to the world of man and attuned to God's presence in the world, and that's what made him so unique. And, the other heroes of last week's Parsha, the midwives and Miriam and even Pharaoh, the daughter of Pharaoh, they also were potential candidates. But no, God chose Moshe because of his particular attributes. Here's the music, Rabbi. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.